So good evening, everyone, and maybe good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Today, we have again another interesting Power BI session. And our speaker today is Robert Hawker. He's joining us from the UK, and he's been in like about 15 minutes ago. So I'm going to get this out of the way quick enough to go into his session. So this series, this webinar series is brought to you by your BizEdge and MHS Analytics. Your BizEdge is a Nigerian Microsoft Excel, Power BI, financial modeling, consulting, and training company. So if you require training and you are a Nigerian entity, we are one of your best options. And I'm going to share the link. We have some free resources like templates, exam mock, that if you are interested in doing some of the financial modeling exams, or some free resources so that you benefit from you being part of our network. Then MHS Analytics is a North American arm, same line of work, but just catering for the US and Canada market. And to the main part of today's session. So we are fortunate to have Robert with us today. He has an interesting career. I'm going to ask him at the end of his session to tell us a bit more about his career journey, his data journey. But as you can see on my screen, he started first as a chartered accountant. Then in 2007, he switched into data. I'm sure he must have been doing data, but maybe now made it a conscious decision to focus more on data. Then he's worked across various industries, and he was previously head of data and analytics for a global influenza vaccine company. So those are companies that are like they make the most of money globally, and they have a lot of resources and a lot of worries too from compliance and data side. So he's seen it all there, I guess. And now he works as an independent BI consultant and trainer. He's married with 2 young children and lives in the UK. He's the author of Practical Data Quality, which I think he's going to tell us a little about his book later on. I'm going to share his LinkedIn. I hope it's okay if I share your LinkedIn.
Of course, no problem.
Okay, so I'll share it in the chat, but right now I'm going to hand over to Robert, and I'm going to turn off my camera and go in the background. For your questions, you can drop them in the chat, and you don't need to wait till the end. As you have them, please drop your questions, and I will let Robert take charge. Over to you.
Thank you. Cool. Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and speak to all of you guys. So yeah, I do really like questions throughout a presentation. So it tells me that I'm maybe interesting you. It tells me that it gives me a chance to spot if I'm confusing you. So yeah, do feel free to drop the questions in the chat as we go, and I'll ask Michael regularly just to tell me if there are any questions coming up. So yeah, I'll just say in my own words a little bit about myself. So I started my career as an accountant. I did an economics degree and then worked for PwC for nearly 4 years coming out of university, and qualified as a chartered accountant. But I found myself kind of struggling to get excited about work. Really, it was a drag to get up every day and go to my clients and do my accounting work. I was with an amazing firm and very lucky to be there and learned a lot, but I just didn't enjoy my work. And I think that is how I found myself moving across into the data world. So I joined Vodafone, so a large global telecoms company, and I worked on a large SAP implementation where I became kind of the data geek, if you like. I became the data governance person, helping come up with definitions of data, working on data quality projects, things like that. So I carried on down that vein for a little while before becoming the head of data and analytics for Seqirus, which is a flu vaccine company, part of the CSL group. And at Seqirus, I actually introduced Power BI for the first time when I was in a kind of leadership role. And I just got so excited about it that I found myself having to change career again. I didn't want to be in leadership roles anymore. I wanted to be back on the coalface and building stuff, amending stuff. I found myself not really doing my leadership job as well as I knew I could, because I got excited about Power BI and went off in that direction. And so I knew it was time to change direction again. And I've been a bit obsessed with Power BI now for about 5 years. So I work for a number of different clients today, doing things like Power BI administration and governance. I do some development. I do lots of training. That's what I enjoy doing. And I do that through my company, which is called Maloro Limited. So whilst I was on this journey, I was made redundant at one point because of a company I was working for moving most things over to the US. And although I did actually get another job pretty quickly, I didn't know I was going to get another job pretty quickly. So I had somebody offered me the chance to write a book, and I just thought, yeah, this is a great way to fill my time whilst I'm working on getting another role. And as it was, I had to do it alongside another role. But I wrote this book called Practical Data Quality, and really it was meant to kind of bookend my data governance career, data management career. So I moved into Power BI, but I used the book as a way to kind of write down everything I'd learned previously. So the book is about how do you go from the point in an organization where you keep hearing data quality is not good enough. So somebody keeps saying to you things like, don't use the data from the CRM system, you can't trust it. How do you get from those kind of high level statements to actually properly measuring the quality of data against defined business rules, and then actually going about fixing that data and starting to improve the right data as quickly as you possibly can? And that's what practical data quality is all about. It's full of real life examples from places that I've worked, places that other people I know have worked. And yeah, it was a great experience writing the book. It's been out for about 6 months now. So my publisher actually got in touch when they saw I was doing this, and they offered to give away a couple of e-copies of my book. But in the end, we decided, myself and the Your Biz Edge team, we decided you guys would probably be more interested in data, in Power BI books. So that we actually have a couple of ebooks on offer. So Data Cleaning with Power BI by Gus Fraser, and the complete Power BI interview guide. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a couple of questions at the end of this session, and the first people to answer the question right in the chat will be given, if you answer question 1 correctly, you'll get the Data Cleaning book. If you answer question 2 correctly, you'll get the complete Power BI interview guide. But like I said, it's just 2 copies available, so it's the first person to answer the questions each time. That's the only way we can do it fairly. If you did want my book instead of those books, then you're welcome to ask for it, and that's fine. But I'm guessing you guys are more interested in the Power BI books. I didn't want to force my book on you. So yeah, anyway, that's the intro out of the way. We'll come back to the giveaway towards the end. Okay, so what are we here to talk about today? So as the reason I explained so much about my background is that actually it's quite interesting the way my whole career has kind of come together, really, because data governance was a big thing in my career. And then obviously I've moved into the world of analytics, and I'm there messing around in Power BI all the time. But actually I almost naturally fell into Power BI governance as well. And a lot of what I learned in data governance is quite applicable in the Power BI world as well. And I think that then I bring an interesting view of the world because of that history that I have. So obviously, the people that we build our Power BI reports for expect to be able to trust them and make important decisions and take really important actions as well. And so if we don't govern our Power BI content properly, then there'll be incidents in the organization where senior leaders don't feel they can trust our content. And let's just start by kind of talking about some of the things that can go wrong. And I'm sure many of you will have run into some of these things before. So, I mean, first of all, reports based on ungoverned sources. So you can obviously Power BI reports, whatever the source, whether it's Excel, SQL Server, whatever, they can look extremely professional. So the end report can look amazing, but what the end user doesn't realize is that someone's swimming furiously under the water trying to keep the Excel spreadsheets up to date and CSV files and constantly maintaining things to keep it working. And so if we don't kind of expose those reports and make it clear that there are potential issues with them, then there might be a bit more trust placed on them just because they look good, right? The second one, capacity being overwhelmed by poorly built models. I'll come back to a couple of examples in a minute, but in these days, many organizations are using Power BI or Fabric capacities, and obviously it just takes one poorly built model to actually get to the point where your capacity reaches throttling. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a couple of slides time. You then have the risk of inconsistent reports as well. So if you're not testing and reconciling the reports that you build against other really critical reports, then you have the risk that one team gives one number and another team gives a similar number to the same leader, and actually the numbers are slightly different, and the leaders start to lose faith. You've then got obviously the risk of things like missing data, duplicated data. So missing data can happen just with a simple merge. If you're merging two queries in Power Query, it's very easy to use the wrong type of join, for example, and lose some of the data. Use a right join when it should have been a left join, or use an inner join when it should have been a left join, something like that. People make mistakes. People that are new to Power BI make mistakes. And duplicated data obviously comes from that as well. So let's just talk a little bit more about some of these things. We'll go into a little bit more detail on them. Michael, are there any questions so far?
No, for now, no questions.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so just a bit more then on reports based on ungoverned sources. So like I said, Power BI reports look and feel really professional, and the end user then assumes they come straight from the CRM system or straight from the ERP system. But in reality, things like workarounds, access issues, so somebody's governing your ERP system, you're trying to build a report, but they won't give you the access that you need. And the easiest way to do what you need to do is to download an Excel spreadsheet from the ERP system and push that into your report instead. And you host that maybe on a SharePoint site, and somebody comes along and accidentally deletes a column. I mean, all these things make our reports potentially problematic. So, for example, often I see people, you'd be amazed actually how often people leave their spreadsheets just held on local machines or on their own personal OneDrive, and then when they leave an organization, the report stops working. You've got spreadsheets are problematic, obviously, because you can enter data into them without any validation at all. So suddenly somebody starts entering the word non-applicable in a numerical field, and you get errors in Power BI and your refresh fails. Somebody comes along and adds a new column. The spreadsheet's only extracted from the source system once a week instead of daily, and people think it's going to be daily. And often just the effort we have to put into getting a spreadsheet working is really significant. So all of these things come up all the time, and when you're looking at using spreadsheets, and start to threaten the accuracy and the trust in your Power BI reporting. I'm hoping you recognize some of these things. I'm hoping you're running into some of these things. So here's a real life example at one organization I worked at. So you had two different teams. One was the risk team, whose job was all about working out if the organization was lending too much money to its customers. And the other one was the collections and recoveries team, whose job was to collect every penny owed to the organization. And they were both building reports. And the collections and recoveries team would include every single balance owed, because that was their job, to collect every single balance owed. Whereas the risk team would just cut out the mortgages that were coming to the end. And actually that, in an organization as big as the one I work for, that is a big number. And it led to both teams presenting within a week to the board, and basically presenting a number that was a few percent different for good reason. But because they hadn't worked with each other, there was no kind of reconciliation done in the testing, that the inconsistency really alarmed the board. And actually the board ended up spending huge amounts of money in a large program to try to kind of put that right, if you like. And I'm not convinced actually that it needed to be put right. I mean, both reports were correct, but it's just that there was minimal documentation, minimal testing, and there were silos between those teams. They didn't work with each other. So again, hopefully this is ringing some bells with people. And then another one I deal with all the time. So I manage the capacity for one of my main clients at the moment. And obviously they're using Power BI and Fabric capacities. And actually, here's a couple of real examples. So on a Friday, a data flow was reworked without going through the right governance, and it was rushed into production. On Sunday, that data flow ran for 15 hours, starting at 7 in the morning. And then on Monday morning, because of the way smoothing works with Power BI capacities, that the refresh was smoothed over a 24-hour period. And on Monday morning, I came in and the capacity had built up a huge overload. Basically, it had come with a huge overage that needed to then be paid back, and it took nearly the whole of the Monday to pay back. Fortunately, we'd segregated our important reporting and put it on a different capacity, so it didn't cause a huge problem, but it was, you know, an example of what can happen when things are done without the right governance. And then another similar example, so a Power BI report was built with a massive table with many columns, like 50 columns, that could and millions and millions of rows, and it could be exported into Excel. And a training session was actually run, including showing people how to export that table to Excel. And all the trainees in the session tried to export at the same time, and straight away it led to an overload on the Power BI capacity. So all it takes is one poorly built item and a poor practice, like showing people how to export when potentially something could be done within Power BI, to cause an issue like this. So look, I'm hoping that you guys are with me, that it's time to do something different, and we have to come up with an approach to start managing these issues. So does anyone have any questions?
Any questions? So Robert wants it to be really interactive. If you've got questions, you can put in the chat, and if you feel you want to speak, he's also allowed us to make you indicate. Just raise your hand and I will mute you.
Cool. It's fine if it's all clear and people are in agreement. It's fine. It's no problem. I'm always happy to take questions, but thank you for that, Michael. Okay, so let's get to the meat of the presentation then. So over time I've developed an approach to kind of manage these issues and make things better. And I name it endorsement just because in Power BI itself there is a concept of endorsement where we can change artifacts to promoted level and certified level. And just to kind of bring that to life, I'll just pop into Power BI for a second and show you. I'm sure many of you have seen it before. So let me just go to my workspace. So I'm here in my training examples workspace just for now, and I've got this data set here, wide world importers, and I'm just going to go into settings. And so Michael, I hope you're seeing Power BI, yeah, on the screen.
Yes.
Good.
Power BI service, right?
Phew. Because I don't want to go for 5 minutes and then be told I wasn't showing Power BI. That wouldn't be good. So down here we've got this endorsement and discovery section, and you've got these 3 levels. So no endorsement, promoted, and certified. And the way this works is promoted actually can be used by anyone in your organization. So, you know, that there's no way of restricting that. So anyone that builds a data set has the right access in a workspace can come in here and say promoted. But actually you can limit certified in the admin settings to just a small number of people who are allowed to raise things to this level of certified. And the other thing you can do, which is nice, is that you can actually provide in this link here, you can click, you can actually put a custom link in there. So you can see I'm actually linking to this presentation just to demo it to you guys, but you can link to anything, any kind of document. Then you can then tell your users, look, if you want to get something certified, here are the steps you need to take. So, you know, I would probably link them to a blog post that shows all the things that they need to do to get up to certified level. And just for those of you that are Power BI admins, just really quickly where these settings are. So if you go into settings and the admin portal, then, you know, you can just type certified. So you've got certification switched on. Here's the URL. So you can put whatever URL you want to send them to a certain document. And you can say that only specific security groups can actually do certification. So that's something really handy. And you can also delegate that at the domain level. So if you've got multiple domains set up in your organization, you can say that some domains are allowed to self-certify, whereas other domains, maybe like an enterprise one that you own centrally, they're not allowed to self-certify. So that's the reason I'm starting with that demo is just to explain why I've used the term endorsement. I wanted to stick with the Power BI term because it's kind of nicely tied together with the solution itself. So what is endorsement? So you can mark content as promoted or certified. And what I do to sort of around that is have a framework that sets a consistent standard so that anything that's at promoted level has hit certain targets and anything at certified level has hit certain targets. And the first thing people often ask me is, well, won't that make it really painful to get anything delivered? Won't it make us really slow? And the answer I give to that is that no, because you have to look at the situation. You have to work out whether something really needs to be promoted or certified. You come up with a target level and say, well, this one's going to be used for our budget setting for the next financial year. So it's really critical and we need that to be certified. And this other report's going to be used to decide which customers we take on and which ones we don't. So that's really critical. But actually, there are a bunch of other things we're doing that are one-offs or ad hoc, or they really only decide less important things like I don't know, seating charts in HR, for example. I mean, you're probably not going to make those certified because the end result, if the seating's wrong, is less of an issue if you get your budget wrong. So you put this effort into the things that really matter. And then what does this endorsement process actually involve? We'll get into this in more detail, but basically it is making sure that what's been built technically in Power BI is reviewed by somebody who with at least the same level of skill as the developer. It's making sure that there's a robust testing process in place that involves the right people. It's putting documentation in place, both in the Power BI model itself, but also additionally in a Word document if necessary. And then it's about communicating. So when you're making changes to something in production, how many of you guys today send out something to explain what is changing, what the end users can expect to see, and how it might need to change their ways of working? I bet not many of you do, right? I never did. So that's what endorsement is all about. So let's get into it in a little bit more detail. So I divide it into the three levels. So the two levels here are aligned with Power BI. Promoted and certified are aligned with Power BI. So, and you can see I've actually used the right icons. So that's the promoted symbol in Power BI, and that's the certified symbol in Power BI. And I actually carry that through onto the reports themselves as well. So there's some graphics on the reports themselves where people can see, is it level 1, 2, or 3? And even if they haven't noticed in Power BI, they'll be able to see it on the report itself and click a link to find out more about what these things mean. In general, prototype / ad hoc, things that are for internal use only, maybe they're for one-off prototype type reporting, and low impact. And then promoted is something that's kind of moderate impact. It might go external, and then certified is something that is, internal and external use, very high impact reporting. And I think those are quite woolly. So the next slide talks about a point scoring system. So how do we kind of establish which ones should be in promoted and which ones should be in certified? So I just want to talk about prototype a little bit for now. So again, going back to trying not to slow things down from a delivery perspective, I always tell organizations I work with, there's no harm in something that is intended to be certified in the end, starting its life as a prototype. So if you've got time pressure and you've been asked to build a report in 2 weeks, then fine, release it, no problem, but mark it as a prototype. Tell your end users it's a prototype and tell them that what that means. Tell them that it hasn't been fully tested yet. It hasn't been peer reviewed. Tell them what risk comes with that model, you may have done a really good job, and you may have done your own developer-led testing, but you just need to be honest with them about what level it's at. If don't let this process slow you down. Release it on time, and then come back and improve it over time. Get it to promoted, then get it to certified over time. And a big important part of this is telling your end users what to expect from these different levels, so they can make the right judgment call. So if your CEO has demanded a new report and they want it in 1 week, then they have to expect that it's going to come as a prototype and it will be potentially untested, and they have to then decide that to use that in a sensible way, so that you wouldn't bet the future of your company on the output of that report without putting some more due diligence in place. Okay, so the point scoring system. So essentially it's this criteria can change depending on your organization, but the idea is just to put something a bit more quantifiable in place, where you're saying, how do I decide, should this be promoted in the end or certified in the end? And again, I say in the end because it doesn't need to be promoted on day one, doesn't need to be certified on day one. So for the organization I'm working with at the moment, less than 10 people was kind of considered to be in that prototype area. Promoted is looking at 10 to 50. Certified, it's when it's quite wide use across 50 or more people. We've already talked about internal versus external, but you can also see the levels here. We're talking about exec level users for these certified levels. Sensitivity, you're looking at how sensitive it is if it was shared around the organization. So perhaps something that's got HR data in it, and where we're using something like row level security to make sure that only the right people see the right information. And then obviously things like checking the row level security in the peer review are going to be much more important than less sensitive data. So sensitivity is a good one, I think, to help decide which level it should be at. And then finally, the relevance to the strategy. If something's absolutely fundamental to delivering the business's strategy, then I would imagine it needs to be certified. Otherwise, you're in danger of basing decisions on something that you can't trust. So, as I said, artifacts often start as prototypes and gradually move up to promoted or certified. Shout if there are questions, Michael. I'm just ploughing on, but just interrupt me anytime. Okay, so the building blocks of endorsement then. So I've already mentioned them quickly. So you've got peer review. So that's looking at making sure that the development is using best practices.
Rob,
Michael,
is this a
yes.
good time to read a question? All
yeah,
right,
please.
So there is one, so I'm going to read it. Okay, so Tolu is asking, does this mean that for all reports that have been built and adopted by users, they should be marked as promoted?
That's such a great question. Thank you, Tola. So what I would say is it's really tricky to put this in when you've already got 100 reports or 1,000 reports or whatever, because you don't necessarily want to go back and peer review and document and test and everything like that. So what we had to do at organizations I've worked at is use an approach where you there's a term called grandfathering, which basically means you accept that was built at a certain point in time with certain set of processes in place, and you will then give it the appropriate level based on the user's experience with it. So if something's been around for 6 months already and it's working really well and everyone's confident the data is right, they've never uncovered any issues with it, then you would give it a status of like grandfather promoted or something like that. You would say we haven't gone back and done the peer review documentation or testing, but we as a group believe we have sufficient evidence that it's safe to use, so we are going to give it that promotion level. But I think you obviously have to use that approach carefully with judgment. Again, if something's just fundamental, if there are 3 reports in your organization that would, if they're not right, you're kind of breaking your organization, you might want to go back and actually apply this approach rather than accepting the grandfathering. Does that answer your question, Tola? I'll carry on, and Michael can interrupt me if I didn't properly answer your question.
She did a thumbs up, so yes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Thanks, Tola. That's great. Okay. So then peer review then. So what is peer review? So it's making sure that the best practices that you've outlined in your organization are being followed. So are the right data sources being used? So for example, if the data's in your data warehouse, your official enterprise data warehouse, have they actually used the data from the data warehouse, or have they, for some, maybe they didn't have access to that and they've downloaded something to Excel instead, so avoiding those unnecessary Excel files and things like that, using the right architecture. Secondly, is it performant? So are we seeing people using query folding and things like that, where people are filtering? Are they filtering early rather than filtering at the end? Are people using too many merges when they could be doing something different, because merges can be quite unperformant? All those kinds of things. Well built and designed. So, do you see many steps repeated, like change type 1, change type 2, change type 3, change type 4, when actually it could all have been organized into one single change type step? It's all of those kinds of things. And then lastly, but absolutely critically, quality visualization. So are people using the corporate color scheme? Have they got accessibility in mind when they built the visualization? Have they chosen the right types of visuals for the right message? Do we are we doing are we telling the proper story, or are we just dumping data in tables in our Power BI report? So there's almost two stages to this. So one's like a Power Query, a model review, and looking at the DAX and all of those good things. And then the visualization is a more a slightly different focus, where does it look and feel, is the user experience good? So that's what peer review is all about. And I call it peer review because it's unusual for organizations to have enough people to have like a central team that reviews everything, right? Imagine if everything that's developed in your organization was sent to you in a central team for review. You just wouldn't have the bandwidth to do that. So the idea is that you find Power BI champions right across the organization. So you pick out the best people in finance, the best people in commercial, the best people in HR who are doing really good jobs with Power BI. You educate them on what's expected, what the best practices are. You train those people, and then you ask them to become peer reviewers in their function and make sure that what's coming out of their function is of a high quality. So then the next one, documentation. So this one I'm going to spend a little bit of time on later, but for now, it's just about maintainability. So if people move on from the organization, it should be possible to understand why they were doing certain things, why there are certain transformations in place, and you should be able to potentially rebuild things if something goes wrong. That's the idea of documentation. And then testing. This is just about having a certain way of testing that everybody adopts, a certain standard, if you like, that everybody works with, and making sure that you can demonstrate what needed to be tested and what was actually tested. And it's not just kind of developers testing things on the fly. It needs to be real business users. And then finally, you get a checklist of all these things together. You have a kind of pre-go live meeting, get everybody to agree that we reached the right level of promoted or certified, mark it as that in Power BI, and then issue comms to tell people what level you reached. And all of this is kind of supported by deployment pipelines, and you'll see how in a minute. So for anyone that doesn't know, a deployment pipeline is just a way of creating a dev, test, and production version of your workspace, so that you can have a live production version, and then you can have a new version coming through a pipeline which is being reviewed and documented and tested along the way. So let's take a look at how that all fits together. So if I jump to the next slide, we have the overview now. So I've now introduced pipeline stages. So what this is basically saying, what are we doing when things are in the dev? What are we doing when things are in test? And what are we doing when things are in production? and you guys might have 5 stages, you know, so maybe you'd need to break this down in a different way, but most people have dev, test, and production. So what you're doing is you're obviously building the report in dev. You're having the technical peer review and the visualization standards review. So, and the idea of this, what we're trying to get out of this phase is that we're not wasting the testers' time. If we're really working with end user testers, we want to make sure those end user testers are actually getting a quality product that's worth their time. If you give them something that's got 1,000 defects, then clearly it's going to go back to the development stage and change. So the peer review makes sure that the tester gets a quality product to test. We then have the testing phase, and I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, but that starts with risk assessment. So the idea is to spend time understanding what the risk of the change actually is and only testing what needs to be tested, not testing everything. And you'll see documentation is in this phase as well. And one thing I really believe in is doing the documentation towards the end of the testing phase, which may sound a little strange, but I think that test phases can often change the product quite a lot. And if you do your documentation right at the beginning, then you're in a situation where you have to keep changing that documentation incrementally through the test phase. So I always recommend putting the documentation towards the back end of the of the test execution. We'll come back to this in a minute. And then go live preparation. We talked already about the checklist, and you would produce release notes to say, look, this is a new product we're releasing. This is what it does. Or if it's a change to an existing product, then you would say, this is what we changed. We've added this new page and the purpose is this, and just make sure that people are properly aware of what you're doing. So let's move on again. So now let's just focus a little bit more on the.
There's a question on that slide,
right.
So I think maybe I should bring it up before you move to this new one.
Please,
All
yeah.
Right. Okay, great. So BG is asking, are there QA people in companies in BI departments, like in other parts as core development?
I think that depends a bit on the industry. So when I was working in pharmaceutical industry, there were QA people embedded in the whole process. You couldn't get anything live really without going through this kind of process, and it needed to involve an independent group. So there's a whole function in pharmaceutical companies usually called quality, and their whole job is to work with different areas. So that might be commercial, it might be manufacturing, it might be IT, and they'll work anything that's being released that has a kind of patient impact. They'll get involved and actually, QA things. In other businesses, like when I was in telecoms, it's just not like that at all. And QA is not really a function within BI departments. So this is intended to work in a Power BI community. So what all you need is somebody centrally who has the idea of introducing endorsement, and then you find people right across the organization in different functions who are willing to be part of your community of practice, if you like. And those people then become, help you impose these standards, if you like. And the trick there obviously is to get everyone bought into the fact that this is important, like I tried to do at the beginning of the presentation, showing you my examples. So was it BG? I didn't catch the name very well, but I hope that BG. Answers your, does that answer your question?
While we wait for her to indicate or him, I've got a question too. So I currently also work with oh, great. So he or she said yes, that's they're happy with your response.
Thank you.
I've got a question. I'm kind of auditing myself, so I'm part of it. And I actually kind of manage a workspace, and we've got this deployment pipeline, dev, test, prod. And we know there are some aspects that we understand are work in progress, and we've got like an internal understanding. It's not documented somewhere what should happen in dev, what should happen in test, what should happen in prod, and I'm checking it against what you have. So technical peer review, Yeah, I think we are doing that in dev.
Okay.
Visualization standards review, we don't, and I'm struggling to think of if I'm going to try to improve on what we have because yours is more thorough and I think it's better than what we are doing.
Okay.
What will fall under visualizations? I know you mentioned, I'm not so
Sure.
sure, maybe I wasn't paying full attention. Like, what will be the thing that will be unique? Because again, what we suffer with is that we have a lot to do. So that's in all of my places where everywhere where I've worked as a BI person,
Mm.
it's either you have too much work or you have too little work. There's never
Yeah.
that balance. So, so we are in a
Yeah.
situation where no one is willing to do too much review at the dev stage because we're all overwhelmed. There's so many
Yeah.
things to deliver on. So that's on the
Yeah.
dev side. Then on the test side, what we kind of do is we let the BAs do the checks at the test on the
Yeah.
test environment. So they have access to the reports on the test. They
Yeah.
do whatever checks that they think will meet the original client request and user. So I'm looking at artifact documentation and risk assessment. I
Yeah.
know they do execution test. The risk assessment, I don't think we do that, and
No,
I don't know how to explain it to them.
we've got a slide on risk assessment, so I'll come to that in a bit, Michael. But I think let me go back to your Viz standards review. I mean, I think the Viz standards review happening at dev is the most important time, actually. I mean, in some cases, it might be better to do it right at the beginning before really any development is done. You know, some people will use I can't think things like Figma to mock up how the story is going to be with before they even have the data, and try and produce a really articulate story end to end before they even start the build. And I really do recommend that, because if you get all the way into testing before you start actually checking that the visualizations meet the end user's requirements, then you can end up doing the whole product all over again. Because if somebody says, well, that was the wrong visualization choice, or you needed to model that in a different way, then sometimes you have to go all the way back to Power Query and start doing a whole load of things again. So I think coming up with a UI design, if you like, early, and then checking the visualization standards have actually complied with that during development phase, I think is probably a time saver. Because too many times I see it happen right near go live, and actually somebody has to go back and almost start again in certain ways.
Okay, I think I got that. I think we do it before I start development, so we do it on
Yeah.
the. Okay, so that's good to know.
So you're already doing the best thing, which is to do it before you even start, right? I think um, if you've used something like Figma or even just PowerPoint, just to come up with here's the visualizations we're going to put in here, and here's how they tell the story, I think then that is the best way to start development. So you're probably ahead of me. On I should put another block in my slide here that says pre-dev, which involves like visualization checks early on.
Thanks. Okay, I'm looking forward to these slides on the risk. Let me not distract you too much, but
Yeah.
thanks.
No, that's fine. Thanks for the question. It's a good question. Okay, right. Let's carry on. So I think I've covered quite a lot of this beforehand, but this is just to dive into each of the areas a little bit. So first thing I would say, with peer review, there's a bit of pre-work. Again, if you're asking people to do you a favor by reviewing the content that you've put together, and they're other business people like you rather than a central QA team, then I think you need to provide them with a demo of what you've built and walk them through what you've built. I think you could do some reconciliation. So if your product includes numbers that are also in other reports, then just check first of all that your numbers are in the right ballpark and are similar. So if you've got a total number of customers and there's another report that has total number of customers in it, then check to see if it's similar or not, and do a sample check. Make sure that your report does actually include all the records from the source that you think it should, and vice versa. So as a developer, I think before the peer review there's a few things you should do, and then when you're actually when the peer review takes place, obviously you have to provide some basics like the Power BI file, the documentation, if you've got any so far, access to the workspace, handover meeting, and timeline. When do you need your review done by? Is this, can it wait a week? Can it wait a month? Do you need it tomorrow? All of those things. And then the actual scope of the review is I've covered most of this already, but checking the sources are right, checking the queries are well built, checking the relationships are good in the model, not full of many to many relationships, checking the calculations are good, and you don't have tons of iterators covering rows of tables with millions of records, checking the row level security is built correctly if there is that, and then checking the visualization design as we've already talked about. And then who is the peer reviewer? I think that this obviously can vary in different organizations, but you need somebody who's at least as good as the developer that built it. And you need a pool of people, because you can't just rely on the same 2 or 3 people all the time. They'll get overwhelmed. And then documentation here just means you would fill out a template. So you, for just for history, really, you would have the peer reviewer write down their issues, and then you have the developer respond to those issues. So you can see the back and forth, if you like, between the developer and the peer reviewer. So then documentation, the first key thing on documentation is don't just write a big Word document. Do as much documentation as you possibly can in Power BI itself. I'm sure many of you do this already, but in terms of what I mean by that, I'll just quickly explain. So in Power BI Desktop, there are tons of opportunities to do documentation as you go. So here's just a sample model that I use a lot when I'm doing training and things like that. So where would I do some documentation? Well, first thing would be in Power Query. I would come in and actually explain, usually at the source, I'll come in here and just explain the purpose of the query. So I just come in and explain what this dimension city query is trying to do, give a good business background to it. I'd rename steps, for example. So instead of inserted text after delimiter, I'd rename that to a more business friendly meaning. And there are many opportunities, obviously, to do that in Power Query. I then do in the modeling view in Power BI, you've got loads of opportunities to document as well. So you can, again, write a bit about the purpose of the query. You can put synonyms in. You can describe every field if you want to. So you've got lots of opportunities to explain what you're doing. And then in your measures as well, then you can obviously come in and use commentary in here to explain what the purpose of each of the lines of code actually is. So I know that's a very quick whistle stop. I'm just keeping an eye on time a little bit, but the first thing I'm saying here is do make sure that you take advantage of the opportunities in the Power BI model itself to explain things, because it's so much easier to understand when it's in context. There's one I missed, actually. Sorry, visual names. I think it's really helpful in Power BI if people use the selection pane properly. Power BI is frozen on me now. Always the way when you're trying to show something. See if I can get it to work. There we go. Right. So if you go to view and add the selection pane, then you can rename all your visuals as I have here. So instead of just a card, this would just say card. Usually I've renamed that to call it revenue, and that can become very useful when you're doing things like using the optimize performance analyzer, because then when I refresh the visuals, it's telling me very precisely which visuals performed well and which visuals didn't perform so well. So take a look at yourselves, take a look at your models. Are you doing all these things? Because if you are, then you're saving people a ton of time, and they don't need to go and read a Word document to understand roughly what's going on in the model. But there are still things you need to write in a Word document potentially, so that the overall flow of data from source to report, usually there's nowhere sensible to put that in one of your Power BI models. It usually has to come separately in something like a Word document. So in the document template that I've produced, these are the key sections. So requirements, so actually explaining what the report is for, explaining the data sources, explaining the flow of data from the source to the final report, explaining a little bit about the model in terms of which, the key fact tables and how they relate to dimensions and things like that, explaining these are the 3 key measures that are used everywhere and this is what they're meant to do. All of those good things in the documentation. So I've that was my quick demo is already done. Testing, Michael, sorry, how are we doing for questions? I'm rushing along a bit and there might be questions that I'm not answering.
For now, no outstanding questions.
Okay. All right. Hopefully not stunned silence. Okay. So testing then. So I want to talk about risk assessment. I'm actually going to jump straight to the risk assessment. So I used to be an auditor. That was my first job as an accountant. I used to be an auditor. So what we would do before we went to a company to audit them, we would actually think about the situation that company was in and use that to work out what risks there were. So let's give an example. If you had a company that had a really poor performance in the current financial year, but they expected to do much better in the following financial year, you would see them potentially trying to move transactions from one year to the next, to try to make the current year's profit a little bit better and the next year's profit then a little bit less good, because volatility is never good in financials. So as auditors, then we would be checking all the transactions around the year end and making sure that they were accurately recorded, not in the wrong year. So, that cut down our audit work because we focused really, really hard on the right things, on the things that were really important. So I'm a big advocate of doing that in Power BI development as well. So thinking really hard about what's actually being changed, and making sure that we focus the testing on the right things. So here's an example. So we have an existing reliable sales report that's already been in use in the organization for a long time, but we've bought a new company and there's a new table in the data warehouse containing the sales for that company. And we're going to append the new sales data into the existing fact to sales table in our semantic model. Now, unfortunately, this is going to be quite heavy testing because you're messing with your fact table, your major fact table. You're adding in lots of new rows of data and you're going to have to, and if you break that, then it's going to break the whole report, right? You're going to have high severity issues. And actually the likelihood that you get it wrong and it affects something in your report is quite high. So, just adding in the sales, for example, into your sales table probably isn't enough. You probably need to bring customer data in as well, and various other things. So unfortunately that you are going to have a couple of heavy risks that are going to lead to quite heavy testing. But then there are other things that maybe you would test in depth if you didn't think so hard about this, that actually don't need as much testing. So for example, the data refresh might become excessively slow. Well, on this one, maybe the existing table's got 80 million rows and you're only adding 50,000. Well, in that case, you're going to say, well, actually, the risk of that happening is relatively low, and the severity, if we did have a slower refresh, what does that actually cause? Well, it just means the data's a little bit later to be delivered to the report. It doesn't break the report. And then finally, new sales records might create errors on the load. Then the severity of that would be a bit higher because the data wouldn't refresh at all, but the likelihood is quite low because the data's in a data warehouse already. So you're not going to spend tons of time hunting down text data in your numerical fields, but you are going to spend lots of time checking you did the append correctly and that the fact sales query has got everything in it that it should have. So let's think of another example, right? So another example, somebody comes along and adds 3 new columns to an existing dimension table. Well, the risks involved in that are much, much less. And you're really going to focus all your testing on that dimension table. And you're likely to have much lower severities, much lower likelihoods. And so the time you spend testing is going to be commensurately much lower. So that's what risk assessment is. And in terms of what that does, it means we design our test approach in the leanest way we can without spending huge amounts of time on it. And things like the test summary report as well. So you just provide a simple PowerPoint presentation that just says how many defects were raised, how many defects were fixed, how many are outstanding, and just gives it gives people confidence. If they can see the scope of the testing and how many things you've already resolved, people get a higher level of confidence about the work that you've done. Okay, I'm just very aware of the time. I'm going over a little bit. I will.
Rob, you can.
Yeah.
We are happy to be here as long as you are available.
Okay.
So no rush.
Okay. Okay. All right. No worries. I'll keep going. Make sure we get through all the content. Then definitely. I'm always over ambitious with my content, I'm afraid. So this is just something that I've used a lot that has saved me a ton of time in testing, and it may be very obvious. Maybe everyone's thought of this already, but particularly when making changes to semantic models / data sets using the old terminology, I try to isolate the impact of the change and then look for expected differences in data. And what I mean by this is I would I'd get a dev and a test version of my semantic model, and I would temporarily potentially point them to the same source. So maybe I'd repoint my dev version of the model to the test data source. So basically my two different versions of my semantic model will get their data from the same place. I'll then make sure I've refreshed all the data in dev and in test at the same time. And then I'm eliminating basically the differences in data between the two. I've got two models, one with my changes in it and one without my changes in it, that have both got exactly the same data feeding them. And then what I do is I just build a simple thin report, and I did just produce a very quick example. Just give it 2 seconds to open up. I should have opened it before the call. And I just produced some matrices in the file. Here it comes. So I just put a simple matrix together. So you can see for this one, I've got a breakdown by customer of revenue and profit, also by calendar year as well. And then I've got a product version of that as well. So here's all my product data, revenue, gross profit, etc. And you can create as many pages as you want. And then all I do, you can see this is currently pointing at my what's actually my dev workspace. So this is pointing to my FF demo April workspace. And then I can just simply change data source settings and point it instead to the test version of that workspace. So I'm now pointing at the same semantic model, but test, and then click connect. And I can build an expectation beforehand of what should change. So for example, if I, in fact, great example, this wasn't meant to happen, sorry. But I've obviously changed something in the other workspace that means that my measure doesn't work anymore. And so boom, there you go. There's my product reconciliation fails straight away and my customer reconciliation fails. But what's meant to be happening here is that we would see some slight differences in the numbers. And then I've already built an expectation going in, I've changed this measure and I'm now including a region that I wasn't including before. And that region's usually got about $30,000 worth of revenue. And so I expect to see that $30,000 when I switch between the dev version of the semantic model and the test version of the semantic model. And if I don't see that, then I know I have a concern. So it just makes the testing very, very simple, and you can break down your numbers by all kinds of different dimensions to make sure you're capturing all the potential risks and changes that might happen. So I always do this. I build reconciliation files between the two workspaces. I isolate data as the thing that could mean we've got those differences. I make sure I refresh everything at exactly the same time, and then I look for those differences in numbers and see if I can explain them. So hopefully that helps someone on the call. You might all be doing it already. Was that clear? Did anyone have any questions about that specifically?
I have a question, but I'll ask it at the end. So
okay.
I didn't see any question from anyone else.
Okay. All right. No worries. Okay. So then inheritance of endorsement levels. So this is just to explain that obviously a report can depend on a number of different objects below it, right? So a report obviously depends on a semantic model, and a semantic model depends on a data flow, and maybe 3 data flows, maybe 10 data flows, maybe a SQL Server database, etc. And the point I'm trying to make here is that you might have certified data flows, and you might have a certified semantic model, and then you can have a certified report as well. But imagine if one of these data flows is not certified or promoted, then you know you've got there's a lower standard on that data flow, and unfortunately that can have a direct impact on the quality of your report as well. So you have to think hard about whether you're willing to allow a report to be certified when one of the objects it depends on is not certified or promoted. So just a little bit of thinking around that is usually required. So I already covered this at the beginning, just how to promote / certify in Power BI. I decided to move it to the beginning, so I'm actually at the end of my presentation, so I'm ready for Q&A, and then after the Q&A we'll do the giveaway. So I'll ask you guys 2 questions, and the first person to answer in the chat will get a copy of an e-copy of the first of the books, the cleaning in Power BI. So let's see if there's any questions, and then we'll do our little fun Q&A.
Any questions? By the way, I'm interested. What's your screens, your monitor most likely? Are you using those monitors that are like really wide, extra super
Yes.
wide?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Was it a bit hard to see?
No, it wasn't. It was just like your Power BI window looked a lot better than mine. Like it had a lot of space for to
Yes.
expand the different
Yes.
panes. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I got really annoyed actually when Microsoft released the on object formatting pane. So when you've got the formatting and you don't need those panes open all the time. I got cross because
Oh,
I deliberately
okay.
bought
But
an extra wide monitor so I could open all the panes all the time. So I don't use on object formatting yet. I'm still stuck in the past, Michael.
I also do not. I tried it when they released it. There were some things I was struggling with to find quicker, so I
Yeah,
just went back. Okay. Any
I think
questions from
many of us did, but yeah,
any
cool.
questions from anyone else? Okay, so maybe I'll let you ask the giveaway questions. Then we always have
Okay,
2 house questions. The 2 house questions are your to hear your journey. I know you've hinted us a bit about it, but we still ask your
sure.
journey. And then the second is your advice to people who are trying to get into the BI and data analysis space. But those are at the tail end. So I'll let you
Okay,
ask your giveaway questions and then
okay,
giveaway
cool.
prize questions.
All right, so Michael, I need your help. You're going to watch the chat
Sure.
for me. I need you to
Okay.
see who comes in with the right answer first. So,
Okay.
okay, here's question 1. So, what's the best way of documenting a Power BI artifact with my approach? So is it A, B, C, or D? So you just need to write A, B, C, or D in the chat, and the first person gets a free copy of an ebook.
Okay. So your time starts now. Okay, one has come in, 2 submissions, 3
Okay.
submissions. They are all saying the same thing.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. I think should we reveal the answer?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Okay. So the answer was B.
Oh, congratulations, Cuban. So Cuban is the person to, at
Okay.
least on the chat, he was the first to put that option in. So I've
Okay.
thumbs him up. I'll let him know the instruction after questions.
Yes. Yeah. Once we finish the second question, we'll just talk about how we actually give the giveaway. Okay. Question 2. What are the main purposes of peer review? So time starts now. Go ahead and put your answers in the chat.
Okay, 2 submissions have come in.
Okay. Answer is D.
Okay, so the winner is Esther. Thumbsing
Okay.
up our answer. All right, so the instruction for how to get your prize is, I'm typing it in the chat now. You send your name and email to webinar. I've put the email address, webinar@yourbizedge.com, and we will forward that to Rob, and he's going to initiate the process. I think he will forward it to his publisher.
Yes, that's right. So you just need to say if you want. I think actually now I think about it, we've got total flexibility around which books we go for. So so you can just say which of the 3 books you want. Both of you can just say, I want practical data quality, I want data cleaning with Power BI, or I want the complete Power BI interview guide. And I'm not insulted, I promise. If you don't ask for practical data quality, I won't be insulted. I totally get why you would want a Power BI book, because although I think my book's all right, it's not as relevant to this audience.
Okay,
Cool.
I'm
All right.
typing. If you can just stay a few seconds more on that screen.
Oh, sorry.
The
Yes.
data cleaning with Power BI. So I've captured the names of the first 2, yours, the data cleaning part. The third is the complete Power BI interview guide. The complete Power BI interview guide. Okay, I'm done.
Cool.
So
So
I'm
big.
sharing that in the chat so that they know which 3 options to indicate one of.
Okay. Very good. I mean, big thanks to Pact for that. That was
Yeah.
you know, totally them. I didn't ask for anything. They just came with that idea.
Yeah, thank you, Pact. We're grateful. uh, so, yeah, thank you very much. I know we've taken more of your time than the 1 hour, and so
That's okay.
I'll relate to you the last 2 questions. And
Yep.
one is, we want to hear your journey, how you got into maybe the longer version and the one you told us. How
Yeah, sure,
you got
sure.
into.
Yeah, so I mean, it's actually the first part of the journey is quite funny, really. I mean, I joined Vodafone from PwC, still with no idea that I was going to end up in data. I went to take a finance related job. It was about Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, if anyone's ever had to do that. And when I got there, the boss had kind of already given my job to somebody else who joined a little bit before I did, and he asked me to work in a more technical IT type role, which I'd never dreamed of doing. And at first I was thinking, God, I'm not happy about this. I'm going to go back to PwC. But within a few weeks, I realized that I was much more excited about doing that than I'd ever been about my auditing job. So I was building reports in Cognos. I was doing building workflows. I was, eventually that was so successful that I was asked. I was only 25, and I was asked to go to the CFO of the Vodafone Group and help him sign off Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. So I was one of 2 people that went into that meeting. So that was amazing. And then the next big thing at Vodafone was this big single instance implementation of SAP. And I started looking at finance data because I had this finance background. Everyone initially put me into finance world, and then from that I got into master data management tools, data quality tools, and then eventually was promoted and led that team for a good while. And I got a little burnt out there, to be honest. It became by the end of the 10 years, I had suddenly quite a big budget and lots of people in the team. And actually, I'm quite introverted. I quite enjoy being on my own in my room doing my thing. And I was in calls from 7 in the morning to, for sort of 6 at night, and it was just too much. So that's why I kind of moved on. And I think, yeah, I carried on down that governance route for a long time. And then, like I say, I was leading data and analytics at Securus, which was a fantastic role. I was there for nearly 5 years. I really enjoyed that. But I just realized that the bit of my job that I enjoyed the most was hands-on keyboard in Power BI, learning DAX, teaching others. I was running a Power BI community call every week where I would work with another fantastic guy called Alsager Gunnarsson, who's a Microsoft MVP that we used to bring along. He taught me how to use Power BI, and he would then answer all our users' questions every week. And gradually over time, I was answering more and more of the questions as well. And I just thought, I love this. This is fantastic. So yeah, that's really how I ended up doing what I do. And I feel really lucky. On a Monday morning, I'm excited about logging in, and I've never been more excited. So yeah, very, very fortunate.
Wow, it's really interesting because
Thanks.
yours is more of like when people are starting, they don't think of it like starting reaching like a management role, leadership role, and then deciding that okay, no, you want to go back to doing the actual
Yes,
technical work, and that's what you did, and it's I can really see how you so much value the actual getting the work done. That's where your own joy of should I say
definitely.
achievement come from, not from calls from money till
Yeah,
evening.
that's right. That's right. I mean, I think the other day I took a data flow that was taking like 11 hours, and I made a few simple changes, and it was then taking 40 minutes. And I know I can do even better, right? But it's a
Wow.
huge improvement. And it's just I was buzzing. I went to tell my wife, and my wife's like, don't care, not interested. But I couldn't. The enthusiasm is just there for that stuff. Anyway.
Great. So this is really motivating for those in the house who genuinely love to actually do these technical bits that, the career path is really, it's not one route. There's not just one way.
No,
Yeah,
definitely not. Definitely not.
great. So the last question is, what advice you have? So our most of our audience, and especially those who watch the recording, they are people who are still at the beginner intermediate level. We've got very few people that are on the advanced, and
Okay.
one of them didn't join. If you have joined, you always ask questions, and his questions are questions you will know this is someone who uses this thing daily.
Yeah.
So we've got like a mix of, I would say maybe 20% advanced, like
Yes.
50% maybe beginner, 30% intermediate. So this, I want you to answer now for the benefit of our beginner and intermediate. What career advice will you give them? If you, as someone who has been in leadership role, what do you look for when you're hiring someone with
Mm,
little years of experience? And also as someone who you've done your hands have been in this, as someone who
mm,
has done the real work also, to what will you see as the way to grow fast and be valuable and not just doing
sure.
different.
Yeah. No worries. Let me think. I think the first thing I would say, if you're looking to develop those Power BI skills a bit more, I think you have to set yourself a target of some kind. So what I mean by that is pick something like the PL300 certification. It doesn't have to be that, because not everybody wants to get certified and take exams, right? But it really helped me. I said, I really want to do that. And it made me, I had a date in mind. I booked the exam, and then I had to do all the learning for it. I did a mock. I saw where the gaps were, and then I used Microsoft Learn and a few other resources to just get myself up to the point where I could pass that exam. And it put the pressure on, and it made me learn things that I didn't need. I wasn't using day to day in my company at the time. So because this is the thing with Power BI, you go to one company and it gets used in one way, so like data flows are not used at all, and then you go to another company and data flows is a huge thing. And if you take something like PL300, then you get this general understanding right across the board of what's there in Power BI. And I think as an employer, I always looked for people that had put effort in to learn in their own, their own way, and develop themselves. And getting certified, some people don't rate certifications very highly, but I do. I think they're important, and I think it helps you stand out from the crowd. Um, the other thing I look for is people that don't just focus on the technical; they're also thinking about um, really trying to understand what the organization is trying to do and how Power BI is going to fit in and help. So if someone comes to an interview and says this company makes this particular type of product, I've learned that that's a regulated industry, so I know my Power BI reports need to be extremely robust, and I need to do lots of documentation. Just that little bit of thinking, that's not a hard leap to make, right? To go from um, it's a regulated industry, so I need to do more documentation, but it's just going to set you apart from someone that just comes in and says, I know how to build stuff in Power Query. And so just doing that little bit of research and thinking about the industry and the company that you're going to be working for, those things make a lot of difference in my experience. What else, was there any more to your question that I didn't cover? I'm kind of thinking.
You did. So though you gave us two right now, maybe if you want to
Yeah.
add one more, but yeah, you've done. I've even written down. You've
Okay.
said I've posted them. I just did
Trying to
a
think.
short.
Yeah. Okay.
Someone is even confirming that
Yeah.
your first advice helped her out. So she did the PL 300 exam, and that was where she learned about endorsement.
Thank you for that. Tololupe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, you're doing well.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Yeah, I don't know if I have any other advice off the top of my head. I'm going to think of more as soon as we hang up. I'm going to think of more, I'm sure. But it's yeah, and I guess if you're one more thing, there's a lot of people that get into Power BI who aren't in a Power BI role specifically. So it might be that you're in finance and you're now dabbling a bit with Power BI. I think I would try and get in touch with whoever administers Power BI centrally in your organization and see if they have like a group of champions, and see if you, or even suggest creating a group of champions and start bringing people together and become known for Power BI, because then you actually open up a lot of doors, because you may be in finance today doing a bit of Power BI, but then you might find that someone in commercial needs someone in Power BI, and someone in manufacturing, it just, if you become known in your organization for being a Power BI geek like me, then I think it opens doors for you beyond the role that you currently have.
And that's really a very helpful one. I've seen it happen a lot of times where they just want someone, like in where I work, they'll call it like they're borrowing you for 1 month.
Yeah.
And it's purely because of something that is not related to your current role, but they figured out you have expertise in.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Exactly.
Okay,
Definitely.
so it's been a pleasure having you with us. We've learned a lot, and thank you for being generous with your time.
No problem.
And also for the giveaway. For the winners, congratulations. And make sure you send the email so that I forward it to Rob, and then he can forward it your contacts to Pact. But thank you for participating. Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity. Thank you, Pact, for making it happen, for the kindness. And thank you, everyone, for being part of today's webinar. And see you next week. Thank you, Rob. Have a wonderful week ahead.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to meet you all. Take care. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.